Okay, there's an interesting aspect of Cinco de Mayo or the First Battle of Puebla that I want to talk about, and that's Zaragoza. And I brought him onto the a screen. If you can see it, or if you're looking at a screen, Zaragoza, like I say, he was born in 1829, so he was quite young when this battle was fought. He was an experienced soldier, though. Mexico at this time had been through a number of wars. There had been a huge civil war in Mexico between 1857 and 1860 called the War of Reform, and it pitted kind of Juarez's liberals versus conservatives in Mexico. And it's the conservatives later that are going to support Maximilian. So in some ways, what we have from the Mexican side, when Maximilian comes into Mexico, it's a continuation of the Mexican Civil War. Napoleon III takes advantage of that. But going back to Zaragoza, here was a guy, a young man, very experienced fighter. He actually was high up in Minister of War, I think, in the Juarez's cabinet, and he's the guy that Juarez trusts. He sends him to Puebla, and Juarez's trust is verified, or it's justified because of Zaragoza checks the French on May 5th, 1862. So here's what's interesting about Zaragoza, though. He's one of the great national heroes of Mexico. He used to be on the 500 or 5,000, no, 500 peso note. I guess he got replaced by Diego Rivera. But anyway, there's statues of Zaragoza in Mexico, especially in northern Mexico. Very distinctive because he wore glasses. And also, though, if you go to Goliad, Texas, where the Battle of Goliad was fought in 1836, not only is there a statue of James Fannin, the officer who got all of his men killed at Goliad in 1836 because he was very, very inept. There's also a statue of Ignacio Zaragoza, which was given to Goliad by the people of Puebla. Well, you might wonder what the heck is there a statue of Zaragoza, the great Mexican general, the great hero of Puebla, at Goliad? By the way, Zaragoza dies very, very quickly after May 5th, 1862. I mean, within a couple of weeks, he gets typhoid fever and he dies very tragically. But anyway, here's the reason. Ignacio Zaragoza was born in Goliad in 1829, and if you remember your Texas history, Goliad was still part of the Mexican Republic in 1829. His father actually was an officer in the Mexican army. His father was Miguel Zaragoza. And so that's kind of interesting, right? It shows kind of the shifting borders of Texas and Mexico during this period. So 1829, the great hero, one of the great heroes of the Mexican resistance against the French, Ignacio Zaragoza, is born in Goliad when Goliad's still part of Texas. The other part of this that's interesting is that his mother, Maria de Jesus Seguin, was from San Antonio. And as you might catch from her name, she was a Seguin. She was a member of the very, very significant, the very, very upper class Seguin family of San Antonio. Juan Seguin was one of her relatives, and of course, Seguin, Texas, a little bit east of San Antonio, about 45 minutes east of San Antonio, is named after Juan Seguin. So, fascinatingly, I think, Ignacio Zaragoza, the hero of Puebla, was a soldier, very effective soldier, who was born in Goliad, Texas, in 1829. His mother was a Seguin, and his parents were actually married in San Antonio. And this just speaks to how intertwined these conflicts were in the 1860s between the French intervention and the U.S. Civil War. But it also speaks to something that's kind of beyond this course, which fascinates me, the shifting nature of borders, especially between Texas and Mexico, between the 1820s and the 1860s. Because if you think about it, Goliad is Mexican when Zaragoza is born. Then it becomes Texas. Then it becomes the Union. Then it becomes the Confederacy. And then it becomes part of Texas again. So the sovereignty over Goliad is always changing. Okay, so Zaragoza is a Texan, a Tejano, or at least the child of a very prominent Tejano family. Now, maybe more salient to this course is the impact of Cinco de Mayo on the Civil War. Now, I've talked about the impact going north to south, the impact of the Civil War on Mexico, that the Civil War opens the door for the French to invade Mexico because the Lincoln administration can't enforce the Monroe Doctrine, and the Monroe Doctrine had been an ultimatum issued in the 1820s where the U.S. tells Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. But Lincoln can't enforce it because he's in a death match with the Confederacy, and he had a policy, one war at a time. He was not a dumb guy, and he was not going to get involved in a war with France. Also, I think it's fair to say that U.S. officials felt that Mexico was ultimately going to win against the French anyway, that the French had bitten off more than they could chew, that it's going to be impossible to defeat the Mexican nation with 35,000 troops. There's too much opposition. But it's a close call for Mexico, and Mexicans still quite resent the fact that during the Civil War, Lincoln ignored the Monroe Doctrine. And also, worse in their eyes is Lincoln refused to sell any guns and ammunition to Mexico, to Juarez during the Civil War, which really put the Mexicans at a disadvantage until the end of the U.S. Civil War, when the situation dramatically changes, and suddenly there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of weapons that start flowing into Mexico because the Civil War in the U.S. is over. But let's go back to 62. So what I argue and what I do believe is that the impact of Cinco de Mayo, the impact of Zaragoza's great victory at Puebla, it flowed north. Not only was this a significant symbolic and really strategic victory for the Mexican army under Benito Juarez by checking the French for a year, but I also believe it was an important victory for the Union as well, that it was significant for Abraham Lincoln. Because if the French had rolled over the Mexican army in May of 1862 and had occupied Mexico City in May of 1862, they could have done a lot of mischief with the Confederacy at a period where the Civil War was still very much a back and forth conflict. Remember, in May of 62, McClellan is just beginning the Peninsular Campaign. Lincoln has not issued the Emancipation Proclamation yet. I don't think the French would have ever sent any troops into the Confederacy. But he might have recognized the Confederacy because there was a lot of close contact after the French do capture Mexico from 1863 until 1867, especially along the border, especially in the Matamoros area. The Confederates, when the French capture Matamoros in 1864, they worked very, very closely with the Confederates, especially sending supplies, goods, guns into the Confederacy. So I think that Zaragoza did a huge favor for Abraham Lincoln at Puebla, that the impact of the Battle of Puebla flowed north into the United States, across the Rio Grande, into the United States, and it stopped what could have been a very powerful alliance between the Confederate States of America, the French government, and through the French government, the puppet Maximilian of Austria. The French could have really supplied a lot of weapons, could have supplied a lot of moral support, maybe even there might have been recognition of the Confederacy along the border. It would have really changed the strategic situation. If you think continentally now, if you kind of go beyond borders and you think of the interconnections between Mexico and the United States, especially the two conflicts occurring in the intertwined conflicts, which is really the point I'm trying to make here, that it would have been a major victory for the Confederacy if the French had captured Mexico City in 1862. And I think it would have really caused problems for Lincoln. But what happens is, luckily for Lincoln, and it's not just luck, it's because of the courage and the skill of Zaragoza and his men, the French are stopped for a year. And when they finally capture Mexico City in June of 1863, the situation in the United States has changed quite dramatically. Lincoln has issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which is very, very significant, and Doyle talks about this, especially when it comes to European public opinion. It would have been much harder it turned out to be much harder for Napoleon III to cooperate very closely with the Confederacy after, or very openly is maybe a better word, after Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. The French army captures Mexico City in June of 63, and as you should know by now, just a few weeks later, coincidentally, the Battle of Gettysburg is fought, Lee's defeated and forced back into Virginia, and then Grant, maybe even more importantly, captures Vicksburg. So the situation for the Union Army in July of 63, although there's still quite a bit of fighting to be done, the Union Army is in much better shape as a whole in the Civil War. So this is one of the things that I've argued in my work, that Cinco de Mayo was a very significant victory, not only for Benito Juarez, not only for the proponents of Republican government in Mexico, but it was also a significant victory for Abraham Lincoln and the proponents of union and those that wanted to see the United States reunited instead of split in half. So thank you, Ignacio Zaragoza, for your great work, and I love the glasses.